All right, thank you for joining us for tonight's event. My name is Catherine, and I'm one of the event hosts here at Powell's Books. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. If you don't already do so, please follow us on social media on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Tonight, we are so excited to welcome Defne Suman and Maureen Freely. Defne Suman was born in Istanbul. The English language debut, The Silence of Scheherazade, was first published in Turkey and Greece in 2015. Set in the ancient city of Smyrna, Suman's powerful novel follows the intertwining fates of four families as their peaceful city is ripped apart by the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. On an orange-tinted evening in September 1905, Scheherazade was born to opium-dazed mother in the ancient city of Smyrna. At the very same moment, a dashing Indian spy arrives in the harbor with a secret mission from the British Empire. He sails into golden-hued spires and scents of fig and sycamore and cries of street hawkers selling their wares. When he leaves 17 years later, it will be the heavy smell of kerosene and smoke as the city and its people are engulfed in flames. Joining Suman in conversation this evening is Maureen Freely. Freely is a writer with 7 novels to her name and many other strings to her bow. For many years, she worked as a journalist in London, writing about literature, social justice, and human rights. As chair of the Translators Association, and more recently as president and chair of the English Pen, she has campaigned for writers and freedom of expression internationally. This evening's event will include an audience Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you would like to ask a question, as well as if someone has typed a question that you would also like to know the answer to. Please upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Most importantly, please consider supporting Defne and Powell's by purchasing a copy of her new novel from us. A link to buy the novel will be available in the chat. And yes, I'm sorry. We'll be available to chat this evening. Thank you both for joining us, and you're welcome to get started.
Thank you, Catherine. And welcome, Defne. I mean, I'm in Chicago, you're in on the Greek islands. But reading your book twice, I felt that you're my soul sister. And so I have so many questions to ask about your book and how you came to it. But I thought, because this is a Powell's event, could I ask you how Powell's is important in the story of your book and your writing?
Well, thank you, and I'm so happy to be here. This was my dream event, and it's happening, and it's happening with you, Maureen. I can't believe I'm like the luckiest person on earth right now, because I grew up, of course, reading your books and reading your translations, and you have been always a legendary name in my life. So now I'm here with me in my beloved Portland Powell's Books. I lived in Portland for 10 years. And on and off, maybe longer than 10 years. And I wrote the book at Powell's, basically. This book, The Silence of Scheherazade, was written in the coffee shop of Powell's Books on Hawthorne Street. So that was my office, because our condo was so small. I was just going out on my bicycle and going to Hawthorne and the Powell's bookstores and walking around and looking at the books and finding some inspiration, then sitting down on a desk and getting the most amazing coffee from the baristas of Fresh Pot and writing the book, sometimes hours. And everybody kept coming to me and asking, what are you writing? Because sometimes I was there as early as 7 a.m. and 6 a.m. sometimes, because in Portland, coffee shops open very early. So I was just writing, I'm writing this historical fiction. When are we going to read was the next question. And I was always like, I don't know, because I'm writing in Turkish and I don't even know if you will ever read it, because it's like such a difficult market, translated literature. And yet 5 years later, it happened. And I'm so happy that now everybody who asks me about what are you writing, when are we going to read your books, are going to be able to do that. And so, of course, it was Powell's when I first thought about a book lounge event It
Yeah.
was the first thing that's coming to my mind.
So I'm just not completely following the chat, but it keeps popping up. You have a lot of friends who are very glad to welcome you back. Yes.
Well, I really miss them. Because of COVID, I wasn't able to go to Portland last year or the year before. So, I have family, I have friends, I have students, I have so many people in Portland, and I'm sending all my kisses to them, and lovely to see them here.
Yes. So now I imagine while you were writing and explaining your historical fiction to friends, that you were also explaining what the background is. Now, because I come from the same legacies, yes, growing up in Turkey and Greece, I know how difficult it is to explain it to people who have had that part of history erased for them. So you're already practiced at this, I imagine, but for those who aren't familiar with that chapter of history in which, as you say, as you make very clear, it's not just the Greeks and the Turks, it's the great powers, it's Britain, it's France, it's the United States. How do you explain the background of your story?
Well, for me, erasing the past is a very interesting thing, and that's happening all the time in the world. This is how history is actually constructed by erasing. And
very good.
Really, you erase certain chapters of history, and you erase certain people from the geography. So this erasing in space and in time is what I always use in my books. And this was actually, I think, the beginning of the project of expressing how this constructing of history on the basis of erasing happens. And for the case of Turkey, for the case of Asia Minor or Ottoman Empire, turning into what's today's modern Turkey, it's the Christians of Ottoman Empire that's being erased from the geography and from the history. So erasing from the geography happens by exiling people, killing people, massacres, or just sending them away, kicking them out of the country. Which is a very, very tragic, which kind of gives birth to tragic stories. Erasing from history, on the other hand, is actually erasing the memory as if they never lived, destroying a city with the buildings that belonged to the people, that carried the people. And Smyrna, Izmir in today's modern Turkey, is a very good example of that, because the erasing happens with something, erasing the space happens with something very aggressive. That is a fire. The fire cleans everything, sets from the zero. And I thought it's like the best metaphor how I can tell the birth of new Turkish Republic. Like, you reset everything, you forget your past, and in this forgetting, you of course forget and make people forget a piece of history and a group of people who lived on the same geography. And today, when you look at the geography of Turkey today, and especially in the case of Smyrna, there is a gap, like amnesia, as if it never happened, nothing really happened. There are a few historical facts that you learn which are wrong in the history books, and then the rest is blank. And that's, I wanted to really use this as a metaphor, because Turkey is not unique. This is happening everywhere in the world. Everywhere the nation states bring this erasing, cleaning the history, cleaning the memory from the others.
So to go to the background facts, it's disputed, but maybe almost a half of Anatolia, Asian Turkey, was Christian until World War I, until the Great War. And then,
absolutely.
By 1923, there are small Christian communities in Istanbul Istanbul, there are a few islands on which they're allowed to remain. But basically, they're all gone. They're all gone.
They're all gone,
and
yeah.
forgotten, and it's very, very, and also, so in Turkey, the story doesn't happen, but more perplexingly, the story doesn't happen anywhere else either. So people don't even remember it.
Yeah.
The Great Fire of Smyrna was a big story when it happened in 1922, but then the context is lost. So
Yeah.
So you tell the story that is really, really not well known in Turkey and very much in Izmir. My beloved Gelin, my daughter-in-law, is from Izmir, and she hadn't, until I ruined her life, she hadn't heard this story. But also in Greece, the story is very big, but it's also one-sided. Yeah. And
So true, yes.
so what you do in this book is you create, bring to life these families, these characters, these couples who, there might be the spy who knows a little bit more than others, but even he doesn't know. And they're in the middle of this, and they're leading their very complicated but beautiful lives. So where did these characters come from?
That's the question I always ask myself too. Where do they come from? I don't know. When I write, I always remember my childhood playing with my dolls. And where did they come from? Because whenever I had a new doll, I always knew her story. Like, okay, this one had like this past before me, and now from this onwards, she will have this life. I don't know where they come from, but when they come, they are very powerful, especially in this case, in this book, the characters were very, very powerful. They actually led me to write the story. And at the end, it was them. Maybe you have noticed at the end, the rhythm of the book goes really fast because the characters were competing. Again, I was in Fresh Pot, I remember very well. The characters were competing to tell their version of the story. So Edith Lamarck was saying, let me tell what happened. And then Panayota was saying, no, I have to tell you what happened. And Avinash was like, I was running in the heart of the fire. And I was like trying to really type as if I was channeling these people. So they were always so alive in me, starting from Edith. Actually, she was the first one who came to me. And then Avinash, and then Panayota, and slowly, everybody's coming together, Gypsy Yasemin afterwards.
Okay, they're wonderful, wonderful characters. Now, it might be a time for you to read a little bit from the book, but before you do, I'm going to, what I was thinking, because obviously you weren't there, in Smyrna in the beginning of the 20th century, unless I'm speaking to a ghost now. I don't know. There are a lot of ghosts in the book as well. But what it really reminded, I thought, well, maybe it's because you grew up in Principo and Bukada, but which still had that kind of atmosphere. I have a Max. I have a grandson who's promised to be quiet. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. He's being very quiet. So, but can you explain the island where you spent a lot of your childhood, which is a very special island?
Yeah, it's a very special island. It's called Büyükada or Principo in Greek, or Prince Islands, we call it in English. So it's a small island off the coast of Istanbul, which is just 45 minutes of a ferry ride from the center of Istanbul. And it was, again, until 1970s, when I was a child, there were still Greeks, and earlier, like 19th century, early 20th century, it was mostly populated by the Christian and Jewish minorities of Istanbul. And they built the most beautiful houses. There are no cars, only horse carriages. Up until last year, it was only the horse carriages and bikes. Now they have these electric vehicles going around. But it was, I heard people speaking Greek when I was a child. I heard people speaking the Sephardic Jew language of Ladino around me. And it was very, I thought it was very natural, like this is how it is to growing up in Istanbul. Later, I realized most of people didn't experience that. But that was my first attraction to what's happening. Like there were Armenians also, not very much in the island of Principe, but in the next island. Yeah. So I think my interest started, everybody thinks because I'm married to a Greek guy, I'm interested in the Greeks of Turkey. It's the other way around, actually. I was very much interested with the Greeks of Istanbul. So I think I was attracted to Greece and later a Greek husband.
Yes. The horse came before the cart. Yes. What I enjoyed most, and I so hope readers will enjoy, even if they haven't had this experience, is growing up in Istanbul in the 1960s. There were a lot of political problems. The Greeks were being pushed out. The Armenians were being intimidated. The Jewish communities were hiding and ready with their bags packed. But day to day, there was this very beautiful life in the streets in which, because there were not separate neighborhoods, everybody was living together. That was the old Ottoman way. And I don't think there's anything more beautiful. And I don't think I've ever read anybody who could capture that as well as you have in this book. So afi. Okay, so
thank you.
So what you want to read just the opening pages? So that
yeah, of course, I would love that. All right, let's do it. The 1st September. My birth on a sweet orange-tinted evening coincided with the arrival of Avinash Pillai in Smyrna. According to the European calendar, it was the year 1905. The month was September. When the passenger ship carrying the Indian spy approached the port, I had not yet been born, but through the opening of my mother's womb, a slender beam of light had begun to seep into the dark pool where I had lived for months. She couldn't get up and walk, not because of the weight of me, but because of the opium she was inhaling from the pipe wedged between her middle and ring fingers. She turned her face to the window and was watching the curtains flying drunkenly in the arms of the wind. The previous year, or was it 2 years ago, she had danced a waltz with one of the engineers from the Aydın Railway at a midsummer party held at the Burnabat Club. The men had whirled her around on the polished wood floors, much like those curtains were flying around just then. What was the man's name? She remembered his high British cheekbones, the house he lived in at the northern end of the quay, and the soulless skill of his steps. But somehow she couldn't recall his name. Mr. somebody. What? A strange name, not ordinary. She raised her head and took another puff of the pipe between her 2 fingers. Purple rings wavered in front of her dark eyes. Mr. Somebody slid away across the polished wood floor. Avinash Pillai, standing on the second-class deck of the elegant Aphrodite, as it waited out in the Gulf, was unaware of my mother or me. He was busy sniffing the air like a wild animal, his eyes closed, his nose lifted towards a dappled firmament. As the sun set, the land was expelling the breath it had been holding all day. The young Indian man, fed up with the smell of coal and cold iron which had permeated the days-long sea voyage, was inhaling the pleasant aroma of flowers and grass, rose, lemon, magnolia, jasmine, and deep down a touch of amber. Avinash's nose was long and delicate, as noble as an Ottoman sultan's. As he identified each fragrance, he savored its tone and essence as if it were a tasty morsel with which he was breaking his fast, especially the roses. Even with his eyes shut, he could distinguish a white rose from a red one. Somewhere ashore in the city, whose pink lights were dancing on the sea, lived a man named Yakumi. Neither the beautiful city nor its legendarily beautiful women interested the young man. His entire mind was set on the dim room which Yakumi had mentioned in his letters. In the workshop behind his pharmacy, the elderly chemist extracted oil from the petals of the rarest roses brought from the four corners of the empire. What is this captain waiting for now? That freighter will move away and make room for him probably. On the brightly lit upper deck, the first-class passengers, gentlemen in frock coats and bowler hats with expensive cigars splitting their lips, grumble as if they had not already patiently voyaged from Alexandria to Rhodes and from there to Leros, then to Chios, and finally to Smyrna. Not so, sir. That freighter will not move. Don't you see? It has drawn up that barge. It's coal. That one's got to be loaded yet. I am not talking about that one. I'm talking about the ship that's loading the bales of tobacco. It's been standing there for 20 minutes. This ship won't go into the harbor, gentlemen. Its waters are shallow, and captains who don't know this are always running aground on the rocks. There's nothing for it but to wait for the rowing boats. The sounds coming from the quay, the ringing of tram bells, the rattling of carriage wheels, the clanging of horseshoes reminded the gentlemen of pleasures they had forgotten during the sea voyage. Some of them even swore that they could hear the laughter of women drifting out of the nightclubs along the quay. Surrounded by whistling pilot boats, multicolored sailing boats, and freight and passenger ships passing each other and then vanishing onto the china blue waters, the gentlemen checked the time on their pocket watches every minute on the minute. To be this close to shore and not able to step out upon it is intolerable, my dear friends. Where could the rowing boats be?
Lovely, lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
I felt like I was there again. I felt like I was there again, even
Well,
though
that's the plan.
neither of us were ever there. I mean, there's nothing. If you know anything about the past of Smyrna, what we have in Izmir now is just blank. It's just for
No,
me.
yeah. I really, literally, I try to trace the remnants of the old Smyrna in today's Izmir, and there are tiny things, but like really, literally stones or a little cobblestone in some corner. But other than that, not really, except the Turkish neighborhoods. Turkish neighborhoods kept actually a lot of old Smyrna, but the Greek and Armenian neighborhoods, the old Greek and Armenian neighborhoods, nothing remains.
Yeah, I'll ask you a question about that, and then we go to another question, which is the language, just to fill people in. Just to explain that Lloyd George encouraged Venizelos to invade Anatolia after World War I and make Greece, great Greece, the great idea. And it went very, very catastrophically wrong. And is it 3 years later or 4 years later?
3. Yeah.
The invasion happens in May 1919.
True. Yes.
And then September 1922, the
Turkish army comes. Yeah.
And the Turkish army comes, and that's when there's the big fire, and it's all been who started the fire, who kept the fire going? These are very open questions. And there was a wind, but the Turkish neighborhoods survived.
The
Turkish neighborhoods were quite small, yes?
Yeah. Well, kind of. They were up on the hills. Yeah.
Okay, up in the hills. And then just so that people know who the different groups are, because you humanize them so beautifully. But the Levantines, just to explain to people who are the Levantines?
Who are the Levantines?
Who are the Levantines?
Well, Levantines are actually up until of course, growing up in Istanbul, I heard the word Levantines and I knew they existed. But up until I started writing this book, I wasn't really interested. And then when I was doing a research, I put on Facebook, like, is there anybody from Izmir whose parents are And then a student of mine, a yoga student of mine, she said, my grandmother is from Izmir, and her name is Daphne too, grandmother's name, and she is what you call a Levantine. And I was like, what? She's still living there. And then I realized, like, they are still there. They are the Europeans of Turkey, let's say, and they settled in Ottoman Empire, as some of them as early as 17th, 18th century, and they stayed there. They didn't go back to France. And first it was the French and the Italians, and then so they had their new generations born in the Ottoman Empire, born in Smyrna, born in Istanbul, and the children grew up and they settled, and they were mostly in commerce and shipping, and they
Wealthy.
got rich. Yeah, they were very wealthy.
Yeah.
And even to this day, like, they also suffer some difficulties, but even to this day they managed to stay in Istanbul and Izmir, and they still live there. They're the European Turkish land residents,
Yeah.
I can say.
And they speak, well, often they'll send their children back to schools in, France or
Yes,
Britain.
and then they come back.
But the language is always interestingly belonging to another age. Yeah. So
That's true. And they speak, especially in the case of Smyrna, they were able to speak 6 languages altogether. And I interviewed a lot of Levantines during my research, and everybody said back in those days, they were easily switching from Greek to Italian, Italian to French, French to English, and nobody cared about that. And I wanted to bring, I really enjoyed writing a New Year's scene. And I put poor Avinash Pillai, an Indian spy, in the middle of those Levantines. And they keep switching from one language to the other, and nobody cares. And only he is like so bothered why everybody's speaking 4 languages in one sentence.
But this is what I grew up with as well, going to school in the 60s with, you weren't, if in this country or in Britain, if you speak 6 languages, people think you're a genius. No, not there. They could still be considered very stupid, no good at math, but they could speak 6 languages. But they're always switching. It was like water in a sloshing around a boat. Whatever language was on the other side, they switched to. So it's very, very beautiful. But this brings us to the question, the unendingly fascinating question of language. Now, Turkish to English is really hard. It's really hard. Every time I meet a new sentence, I remember how hard it is. And this is a really graceful translation. It really doesn't get a foot wrong. It really doesn't. It captures what the masal, the sort of straight voice beautifully, and it's it's coming from another language, and it's just working. So can you explain what, this is a question that has been prompted as well from our audience, how you found this special translator and how you work together with her?
Well, she's a really, really special person. And I found her through a friend of mine, because I didn't understand this translation, how it's going to happen. And for many years, I waited for a publisher to approach me and say, hey, we want to translate your books. And then finally, I realized, no, it's not going to be like that. I have to have them translated to English so that a publisher can read them outside of Turkey. And I was just asking around, and a friend of mine said, there is this Betsy Hanım living in Bozcaada, which is this tiny, tiny island in the northern Aegean coast of Turkey. Well, maybe she did translations in the past. Maybe she would be open. So I wrote an email. I said, I have some books to translate. Are you interested? And she's American. She came to Turkey in early 1960s. She became an English teacher. She became an English teacher in an American high school for girls, and your school. And she stayed there, and she left for, I think, for a few years back, went back to US and then returned to Turkey. And she still lives in Turkey in that remote island with her dogs and her cat. And she said, okay, let me try. So she translated and she sent me chapter by chapter, and I read the chapters, and then I send feedback, and together we thought, how can we say this? How can we have this tone? But I think she did an amazing job. She is a true lover of literature. That was the
Yeah,
most important thing. She loved it with all her heart. She loved
yeah.
this book, and she cried for the book, and so that's the result. I think it's her deepest love and her mastery of the two languages.
Yeah, yeah. But also it's the love. It's the love, which isn't, it's not something you can make up. Obviously, she loves the book, but she also loves the
But
language.
we worked really hard. She worked really hard, and I worked really hard. Like chapters were coming every day to my inbox, and I was like trying to write another book, and at the same time, like reading
Yeah.
out loud. Sometimes reading to my husband because he speaks very, very good English. Like, can we say it that way? There were like some parts that were more. We tried to find older English, but kind of, because it's written with kind of an older Turkish. So we wanted to match it with an older English idioms. And Betsy was very good in finding them, because she said, oh, I'm from the South. This will be so easy for me to finding these phrases and things.
That's right. So, I mean, that's from the American South, where language is more decorous.
Yes. So she used that talent of hers.
Yeah. So when I translate from Turkish, often I will draw upon the vocabulary that I internalized as a teenager reading lots and lots of Victorian novels, where, because in the Victorian age, people were not so Anglophone writers were not so embarrassed about emotions. There was lots of them. And in the 20th century, it has to be more clipped. So where I went was to get to have the dignity of those emotions. You needed to get those older words that
exactly. That's what we tried to search. And sometimes I looked at the dictionaries, and so it was a hard work, but I think it was worth the effort.
Yes. So there are quite a few questions coming in about the translation process, and you've had a very a good example of how a relationship can be an education for both the translator and the writer. It's just like a wonderful sharing. Yes.
Yes, it was like we thought together. We pondered upon things together. Can we say it this way? No, it's more like this.
Yeah. And there are some questions. Is it difficult for me? Is it difficult to work with authors who like to participate? Sometimes, yes. And I thought, after those sometimes, after too many of those sometimes, I thought, oh, maybe I'll just do classic authors who are no longer with us. But then I found out that they have families who guard every comma very carefully. You can't have a conversation. So it's endlessly, I mean, my life has never been so interesting as it has been since I became a translator, partly because I'm a novelist as well. So that going back and forth, and all of us are readers. Yes. So another question coming in is about what about your other books?
My other books are coming, and the next one is At the Breakfast Table, which is taking place in Prinkipo Island in Büyükada in the Prince Islands. That's taking place today, in 2016. It's not historical fiction, although it goes to past, because every narrator, it has 4 narrators, brings their past into present. So that one is coming next year, and then hopefully all the others will follow.
So in answer to Amy, who asked this question, I mean, one of the tips I'll give you about anything that's set in Turkey is it could be set in the present, but Turkey is a lot of, you put one foot ahead in front of the other, and you fall into history, but you never know quite how deep you fall, and you might not know how to read what you fall into. Yes, but that's why. So it has such a layered history, and so much of it never gets into the official history. So it's just, you find it through people's lives and speaking.
That's true. Yeah, but who are we if we don't know what happened to our grandmothers? That's always my starting point. When I get to know somebody, regardless where they're from, I always ask about their grandmothers. From where did they come from? Why did they move? Because a lot of people moved early 20th century to the United States, from Greece, from Turkey, to Australia, to New Zealand. Why did they move? Because I'm not moving all of a sudden, pack my things and go to a place where I know nobody. So there must be something remarkable in people's lives to have this big moving. And I'm always, and there's no way I am not feeling that something big that moved my grandparents out of their home. It is in me, it's in my genes, it's in my memory. So that's my starting point always. Nobody is free from the past of their geography.
Oh, no, especially if they don't know what it is, then they're really not free. So I would say to our listeners who might be new to the Turkish story, which is endlessly fascinating as you're beginning to understand. What we have as the Ottoman Empire is coming to, is imploding, coming to an end, we have so many displacements from the larger of Muslim communities, from the Caucasus, from Greece, from the Balkans, who are refugees. There are massacres, and they're coming in. So huge percentage of Muslim Turks who are displaced, having lost everything, and these are really interesting untold stories. And then you have the new nation, which has invented a new story for itself, which is very squeaky clean. This is why the story of Smyrna, the burning of Smyrna is a very important date in Turkish history. It's not understood that way. It's the victory. Yes. So the 9th of September.
It's fire. Fire is like in yoga we use fire a lot. It destroys everything. It cleans, it sets everything from the beginning. So for an author, it's an amazing metaphor to tell. It erases the memory. And now you have to build, and it really literally in Smyrna, 2 neighborhoods, Greek and Armenian, were flat. Nothing was there. Now, and then they pushed the people out, kicked them, killed them, and then they built this whole modern Izmir on the ashes of another existence.
And one of the other really interesting things about Izmir is that a lot of those displaced populations I was telling you about, from families that had lost, peoples that had lost everything, they end up being resettled in Izmir. And my father was a professor, American professor in Istanbul most of his life. And he always told me, he said, every year, the top results in the national university exam are from Izmir.
Yeah.
That was because he felt that those families worked harder for their children. I don't know.
That's true. I always think like the Turkey, the old Ottoman Empire, Balkans and Greece, today's Turkey, like that whole region south of Russia, they're as if like their people were displaced and other peoples were replaced in their places. So early 20th century, there's been this, let's remove these people and then let's put these other people on the land and let's try to build something new.
And also that was the age, not just in Turkey, but everywhere.
Everywhere,
and every nation needs a story. I was once doing a radio documentary on the Turkish language and the reforms, or the Turkish language revolution, because it was very much changed throughout for almost a century. It's been a political project. And I kept on saying to my BBC producer, I said, it's not just Turkish that was reformed. There are all these other languages. What happened to those other languages? And she said, no, we're talking about Turkish. Those other languages don't matter. I said, just ask everybody we interview, just ask, what languages did your grandparents speak? And the whole story got from there, just to say, what are the stories of our grandparents? It would be, my grandmother was a Hungarian, but I was told not to speak to her because she would ruin my Turkish, or because everybody was.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Yeah. My other book, At the Breakfast Table, is about that. It's about the
Yeah.
dying, like now dead language of Pontiacan or Romaica, like the ancient
Jamaica.
Greek spoken in the Black Sea, and
Yeah.
how it kind of brings the identities back. But that's for
Wonderful.
later. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Now, I'm going to check to see. I'm going
The
to
questions.
any other. Oh yeah. Defne, do you have a favorite character in this novel? If so, why? While you answer, I'll think about what mine might be.
Well, as I told you, Edith Lamarck was the first person
Yeah.
came to me, and it's the person that I associate with myself the most.
Can you explain a little
think.
bit? She's an amazing character because she's she has a monster of a mother. She's the mother,
Yes.
the most fashionable villain ever created. Yes, but she just doesn't let that woman or anybody else tell her what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's a powerful, she was a powerful presence in me. So I can say she was my favorite. Also, of course, I loved Panayota very much too, and she reminded me all my teenage, what's the word, like ups and downs as a teenage, and then like having a crush on the guy in the neighborhood and all those things. Like she values are so coming from me, from my teenager years, but of course her loss and realizing that everything she had was like the most precious thing, was a turning point in me also. Like this is youth. Losing youth is actually you losing one of the most precious things in your life, because you never feel that way again.
Yeah,
Because you're fresh there. Your feelings are, your sensations, everything is so fresh there. So yeah, these two, Panayota and Edith, were my favorites, I can say.
But not to give anything away, but Scheherazade.
Scheherazade, of course,
She's
is
telling the story, but she's silent, and Scheherazade, that we know, the one that we know, is the opposite of silent. So can you speak a little bit about that? You know,
of course, Scheherazade is actually the narrator of the Arabian Nights, or maybe you know the stories as 1001 Nights. It's our mythology in the Middle East in a way. Like it's the Decameron stories of the Middle East. So we all grew up listening to the Arabian Nights. She's the narrator of 1001 Nights, and her deal is that if she stops talking, if she stops telling stories, she will die. She will be executed. So she has to find a good story for the next day, so she's not executed. This Scheherazade is for the Arabian Nights. My Scheherazade, on the other hand, chooses to be silent, because her story is a story that cannot be told. There's a big taboo about like everything we talked about. You can't tell what really happened. So she chooses silence. She chooses death in a way, because a silent Scheherazade means a dead Scheherazade. So that part of history is a blank, like we said at the beginning. But there's a little twist, because now, as this book I wrote, there are more things happening in Turkey. More and more young authors are talking about the unofficial history. So there is actually, the silence is broken about the past, or we are trying to break the silence about the past more and more as artists, as authors. So the silence of Scheherazade is being broken, and we don't know, of course, our readers, maybe they don't know if our Scheherazade will speak or not at the end. But I wanted to give a hint to that.
and of course, she's telling the story.
Yes,
so
and she's telling a story after all.
she's no longer silent, but we don't know how or why until the end. And also, you know, there are lots of very angry books about told from different sides about what was done, and it's all about anger and destruction. But this is a very redemptive book. You know, this is about.
Definitely. I didn't want it to be a propaganda for anything. I really wanted to tell the story of human beings, of like the heart, the story of the heart, because it hurt my heart when I heard what it was, a cosmopolitan city, you know, people lived side by side. There was beauty. And what's today's word? we don't have anymore is beauty. Like it's not valued anymore.
I think it is valued. It's just not there. Somebody
Not
with
there.
somebody with cement came, but the memory of the beautiful, the beauty is still there, and so it will come back. And also, even if you have you can tell I miss Turkey so much, and Greece, but I miss Turkey so because even when it's in a really ugly concrete neighborhood, something happens that makes it very beautiful because of the way that everybody's sharing that space and
Yeah.
Those little things that you capture so beautifully in the book. There's another tricky question, interesting question from Ülker, is about, can you talk about the Turkish and English titles of the book because there are different choices?
Yes, of course. The two titles were okay. The Turkish title is Emanet Zaman, which could be translated, not exact translation, is borrowed time, which gives the name of a chapter in the book. So when you go to the part 3, the part 3 is called borrowed time. Inside the part 3, there is another small chapter called borrowed time. So in the Turkish one, it's like the Russian dolls, borrowed time, inside borrowed time, inside borrowed time. Borrowed time.
Emanet is a very, very special word.
Very special word. It's not, but my starting point was English because it was said in the book. There is a British, somebody works at the British consulate. I don't remember now who, but it's a true person. He really lived. And he really said to the Levantines who are like having fun, well, you are living on a borrowed time. Your time is coming to an end. This fun, this wealth, this owning this land as if it's yours is coming to an end, and watch out. And they didn't care, and it did come. So when I heard this, I really wanted it as my title, but then in Turkish I kind of had difficulty. Anyway, the funny thing is that finally we named it similar to borrowed time. Now the book was translating to Greek in 2016, and they said, how are we going to translate this name? And I said, let's translate it as borrowed time. And they said, it was 2016 in the middle of the Greek economic crisis. They said, don't put anything borrow on a title. No, because they were borrowing money from Germany. If you put borrow, the book will not come up with another name. And the Silence of Scheherazade was my second choice, or we actually discussed a lot in with my Turkish publisher, which one shall we use? It's a little too wordy in Turkish, say Şehrazat'ın sessizliği. So we went with the other one. So I said, okay, I have the second title. How about the Silence of Scheherazade? And they said, yes, let's take it. And then same with my British publisher, head of Zeus, said like, do we have to use borrowed time? Do you have another title in mind? I said, yes, I do. And that's how it is. Of course, outside of Turkey, they like Scheherazade. It's a little more Orientalist, and so it is more catchy. It's more sexy, as the publishers like to call it, as a title.
Well, but also her name that's her name. So
that's her name, and it's very poetic. The Silence of Scheherazade, for the ones who know that Scheherazade will be executed if she is silent, it's immediately like, wow, what happens if a Scheherazade is silenced? So it's very deep and poetic also. So I like both titles very much.
So we have a kind of a more open question, and I'm going to take notes too. Do you have any recommendations of your favorite authors or books you would recommend that people may not have heard of?
Well, okay, so the root text of this book is Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides.
Okay.
Middlesex, if you haven't read that. Middlesex, it's my first inspiration about Smyrna. It's my first interest in Smyrna was sparked by Middlesex, by Jeffrey Eugenides, who is a Greek-American writer. It begins in Turkey, it begins in Bursa, and then the sister and brother, Desdemona and Lefteris, they moved to Smyrna and they watched the great fire of Smyrna. They escaped, they managed to escape from Smyrna, and they ended up in Detroit, and then the story continues there. But that was my beginning. And then my most favorite, all times favorite novel, and from the plot you can understand why, is Arundhati Roy's God of the Small Things, which is even a more complicated plot than mine. Like the book starts in the middle and then goes to the beginning and then ends with some other part. So there's no linear time. I don't like linear time in books in general. I find it too masculine. So I like these circular times.
Well, the whole point about
plots.
novels is that you can, I mean, the novel is a place where you can play with time.
Exactly.
Because
Like that's
no story
yeah.
goes forward like that.
Yeah, so those are my all-time favorites. Arundhati Roy's God of Small
Yeah.
Children, Small Things, and Middlesex.
Yes. And the new book, you finished and you're about to start another one?
Well, I'm continuously writing. So the translations are coming, but at the same time, I'm continuously creating new books for the Turkish readers. Now I'm writing about Istanbul. It's the history and destruction of Istanbul is what I'm working on right now.
Yeah. That will keep you busy for a few decades. Yeah.
I hope, yeah, I think so.
That's-
and it is narrated by an old Greek guy who managed to stay in Istanbul. So he's able to tell us the Greek past of Istanbul, which is again erased from the space and memory.
Yeah. And as far as authors of Istanbul of the 20th century, are there any that you would like to recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a great fan of Orhan Pamuk. Always. Your translations and his original Turkish, I'm a great fan. I read many times whatever he writes. Ayfer Tunç is another author I really like. It's slowly being started to translate it to English. And she writes fun. I really like her. Murat Gülsoy is another Turkish author. Elif Shafak I read.
But how about the older ones, the ones from other generations?
The older generations, of course, our grandfather in Turkish literature is always Tanpınar, Ahmet Hamdi Tanpınar, who writes like the Istanbul he describes is like a dream. And I love reading just his descriptions of Istanbul, how it's like something goes, like something escapes from your hand, and it's so understandable. Then we have our father literature is Oğuz Atay, and I really enjoy. He's the funniest man. Unfortunately, he died very early from brain cancer, and the funniest.
And he's untranslatable. He's untranslatable.
Well, yeah, but they did translate to Tunamayanlar, so maybe. Yeah.
So
and Firuzan, I really like Firuzan from the. Let's remember some female authors also. Firuzan's literature I find I've been reading her from a very early ages because she was a family friend of my grandmother, and so she kept coming in and out of our house in the island in Prinkipo, and I love her literature too.
And can you actually? I've been very curious about your own grandmother, your own life that sent you to Bukhara and then sent you to all these other places. So, whatever you feel like you can share.
Our house in Bukhara, our house in Prinkipo in the Prince Islands belonged to my grandfather. Actually, it belonged to my great-grandfather, who was refugee from the Balkans, from what's today Northern Macedonia, from Skopje. They came because of the Balkan Wars, and he was actually a very high officer in Mustafa Kemal's army during the Greek-Turkish War. And then for his success in the war, he was awarded this house in Bukhara. And that's where my grandfather and his siblings grew up. Later, my mother and my aunt, they grew up there. And later, me and my cousin Isin, we grew up there. So it's a family house, and we still, like my mother is there right now.
That reminds me of it reminds me of one of my favorite characters from your novel, actually.
Yes. So like 3 generations together and living in a space that not the house changed, but the land remained the same. Living in the same space is always coming from my autobiographical sense. My grandfather was a professor of philosophy, founder of the Department of Philosophy in Istanbul University.
Mhm.
And my grandmother also, she wanted to be a writer, and I think I am continuing her desire, but she was also teaching at the Fine Arts Academy, Humanities. So
Very
that was
successful.
my
Yes.
household. And then, of course, my aunt, my mom, they all became professors too.
Yes. And
So
then
I
you,
grew up with a lot of books and a lot of people writing around me.
wonderful, wonderful, heaven, heaven, and it's still there.
Heaven, yes.
Is the house still there? I mean, is it still in your family?
Yes.
That
Yes, yes. Yeah.
go back.
We,
Okay.
yeah,
So
hopefully next month I'll be there. If
one day I'll come and visit you there.
come, everybody, you are invited.
Okay, I think we're just about coming to an end. So I want to thank you. I mean, it's been a thrill to meet you. I've been very curious to meet you, and so it's been very special for me. And I really do recommend the book for everybody. It has a wonderful freshness to it, bringing history, erased history. The history was erased, but it's come back in this beautiful form, which is life affirming and love affirming and heart affirming, while always acknowledging all of these losses. So it's a very special thing. And I guess I'll hand over to you, Catherine. You're looking yes, you're looking like I'm speaking over my time, but
No, you're good. I just was
No,
like, I was like turning my head to the side to look at something else. I was like, feel free to, rave about each other. We love seeing it.
yeah. Well, I wanted to thank Maureen, first of all, for the great questions. And I'm so happy to meet you, although it's like this, soon it will be face to face, and Powell's books, and Emily for making this happen. It was really, really special for me. And everybody who came, all my friends and readers and family, Portland, US, wherever you are, thanks for coming.
and
And
also,
buy the books from Powell's. Let's say
Yes.
that. Don't
I'm
buy from
dropping
somewhere
the
else.
links.
Please, please buy from Powell's,
and
especially
also,
the ones in US.
Catherine, if you could make sure that you save all of the lovely comments.
Oh yeah.
And pass them on to Defne, because there so many of them are from friends and people who
Yeah.
are part
Yeah.
of your tribe. Yeah.
Yes, perfect. I will do that. I'll have I'll save them, and I'll have Jeremy, the events coordinator,
Okay.
email
Okay.
you.
Okay.
All right, perfect. I'm going to drop the links for the books in the chat right now, so everyone can get it from Powell's. And then I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. This is such a wonderful event, as everyone was raving and love, and it's so nice. But yeah, consider following us on all forms of social media. Here we go. Consider following us on all forms of social media. And I just want to say thank you both for joining us this evening, and everyone have a really good night.
And I hope it's not the last time. Very much.
Not the last time. We'll see you at the next one.
Okay, bye-bye.